well, what is that about, right? What can we notice there about that volunteering that maybe isn't aligned to your purpose? Contrast, right, of being soft and loving and gentle and strong and vicious as needed, and saying no and meaning it and having no be a full sentence and taking a risk to say yes. I think contributing to something larger than ourselves is a perfectly fair synonym for purpose.
Hello and welcome to Hello Moxie. I am so excited to be joined by my favorite fellow N-named compadre.
ND.
ND. Yes, exactly. I've always felt like you and I had a special connection, and it's all in the name. The amazing Nell Derick Debevoise Dewey, who I had the honor and privilege of joining in our heroic public speaking grad course together. And now public speaking business mastery.
Yeah.
And just an amazing person. Nell, thank you for coming on the show. I'm so honored that you're my guest today.
Such a treat, Nicole. Thank you for asking.
So I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about you. Tell us about who you are and what you love. And
Yeah. I'm a speaker, and that's our connection and fun and work and toil over the last year together, getting fabulouser as speakers. Also an author and a facilitator, and all of that work that I do is around leading in 3D. And so thus my burdensome name of so many syllables is just this amazing thing that actually for the last 15 years I've been thinking and working and guiding leaders to align what they do every day in a very tactical, kind of mundane way with their big, lofty vision, purpose, goals, desired legacy. And so through work with really hundreds of people, everything from MBA students very early in career to retirees, legacy, thinking about next gen, next stage, modern elders, we call them, and folks right in the messy middle managers, women reentering the workforce after a break for kids, so the whole life cycle of work. There's this very common human experience of what is this all for? And so we'll get more into it, but that has revealed this lead in 3D framework, which is 3-dimensional leadership for me, my own well-being, we, our teams, our companies, our families, and also the world, the broader communities, the causes that we really care about. And actually, somewhat counterintuitively, that when we simultaneously keep our eyes on all three of those prizes, we unlock win-win-wins. There's upside to that alignment. And so turns out that my name is Derick Debevoise, which is my mother and my father, and my husband is Grant Dewey. And so I have these 3Ds. And last summer, when I was kind of refining the message with our heroic clan and my coaches, they were like, you can't not use that. That's just too aligned. You talk about alignment, you talk about 3D. And so after, 8 years of marriage, not having officially taken my husband's name, using it kind of socially, I'm now embracing it in my professional brand. So that's me. There's a little tidbit that we'll get to or not about my work with horses, which is this really fun, magical version of coaching, not therapy. I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach. But we bring leaders and horses into the arena and we hang out and we unlock all kinds of nonverbal insights. And that's really fun. So if we get to that, I'll share more.
Oh, we will definitely have to get to that. That's so fascinating. Yes. Yeah, I'm super curious to hear. I mean, you've shared a lot with me about that experience, but I think for our listeners, it'd be very interesting for them to hear some of the things that you've noticed as you've implemented that kind of experience with your coachees and the people that you're mentoring. Yeah. So it sounds like this lead in 3D, which is such an elegant and so simple framework, which I think for anyone who's really wants to be an impactful leader and have a legacy and lead with purpose, to have something memorable like that you can always constantly refer to and just keep top of mind. I think it's just beautiful because it's just something that you can always be like, okay, me, we, world.
Not rocket science.
But that's what makes it so easy to implement, right? If it's complicated, people, it's the psychology. The truth is people will So it's beautiful. And I'd love to learn more about, I know clearly it's been inspired by the work that you've been doing for decades, coaching leaders. Have you noticed any differences across generations? Obviously, everyone
Mm.
has this kind of core driver that we want to have an impact, we want to have purpose in our lives. But what have
Mhm.
you seen be the differences between the generations, or are there?
Yeah. Well, where I'll start is that it's a universally human
Mhm.
thing, right? I
Yeah.
think so. I worked in nonprofit for 10 years, which was like the 2000s, right after college. And then I went to business school and came to New York and started doing this leadership development and coaching, integrating that notion of impact that I had in the nonprofit space and all that that provides with business and more corporate, frameworks and mentality and performance. And across that spectrum of MBA students, mid
Mhm.
20s, kind of just kicking out, and then 60s, encore, what's next? What is it all for? And everything in between. It's just a human experience. I think
Mm.
in the kind of 2010s, there was that real purpose boom, and it was a millennial thing and it was trendy and it was these friggin' millennials and what is that? So annoying. They want so much. But actually, it's a very human experience. And indeed, there's all kinds of data about that, when Edelman and some of the other folks who look at purpose and trust, actually, millennials were a bit more worried about money and benefits. They're earlier in their career. They didn't have savings, and boomers were actually more ready to change jobs for impact and purpose and values. So I think that all got kind of, there was a media flair about that
Mm.
wasn't totally accurate based on data as well as my anecdotal work. And so it's a fundamental human drive, literally for evolution, that we want to contribute to something larger than ourselves. If we didn't, we wouldn't be around as a species. So just like very fundamentally, foundationally, we want to do that. And I think contributing to something larger than ourselves is a perfectly fair synonym for purpose, right? It's not
Mm.
about sacrificing or martyrdom or fixing the entire world, right? It's about somehow, some way, in our unique style, background, passion, interest, doing something that advances some group. It's
Mm.
pretty foundational. And so that's very universal. I do think there's an interesting trend, and especially now, even more than in the 2010s when I started doing this work with folks. As Americans, we have tended to live to work for so long, right? Since the Industrial
Mhm.
Revolution, and there's been that grind, and then the knowledge economy came, and it was even more, ironically, we were even more poured in 24/7 technology, blah, blah, blah. And frankly, I think COVID broke that a little bit, right? It put us in our homes. It made us worry about our physical bodies and well being and
Mm.
each other's physical bodies for the first time in a long time. And that, what is this all for, got a lot louder. If there was a values mismatch, God forbid, or even just a misalignment or a lack of juice, people are like, wait a minute, right? And we see the quiet quitting and the
Mm.
massive resignations and, all versions of that. So, in relation to my work, what I think happened is the me and the world got right sized against the we.
Mm.
I think for so long we were like, and not in like a helpfully societal support kind of way, but in a capitalist, commercial,
Yeah.
professional kind of way. We, the team, the company, my identity, my leadership. And now I think there is not that kind of, well, it's not on the table to kind of work for 40 years, get your gold watch, retire, golf, raise grandchildren, right? That's not the corporate contract anymore. So
Mhm.
even if people were wanting that, it's not on offer. But I think people don't. I think there's more of a cyclical nature. Maybe I'll take a sabbatical after college and focus on me, right? The White Lotus girl turned out she couldn't handle it, but that was almost an option. Maybe her little brother will do it. And then I'll work, but maybe I'll be a freelancer before I go corporate, or I'll go corporate and then I'll freelance. Or I'll go corporate and I'll hustle a freelance thing on the side. Not that kind of linear, I'll graduate from college, I'll work for 40 years, I'll retire, I'll do good or give back as a volunteer or a grandparent. It's gotten much more balanced and much more integrated, which I think is a really beautiful and more organic way.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. You're right. It's kind of like the pathways that people are taking now, there tend to be fits and starts and gaps and changes and
Yep.
shifting and flexing and all of that. as people are like finding their purpose and finding their way. And I remember I was talking with a woman last week who shared something so beautiful. And it was just this idea that, we're all on a weaving journey, right? Like it's
Mm,
not supposed to be linear. Like the joy of it is that it does weave and that we're going to go in, different directions along the way. And I'd love to learn, like, I think a lot of us struggle sometimes with finding or knowing our purpose, especially
mm,
when we're younger. What is your advice, or how do you help the people that you coach kind of tap into that so that they
yeah.
can align their me we world with that central purpose that they feel is their gift to give to the world
Yes.
and support?
Totally. I love that question. I talk about purpose pressure. I think, like,
Mm.
especially for the aspirational, highly motivated, productive among us who want to contribute, there's this like purpose pressure of like, what's my purpose? Like, what's my purpose? Which is so
I've never heard
charming
that
and
before, purpose
heartfelt. Oh,
pressure, but
it's
it's so true.
so real. It's so real. And again, it's like subsided a little bit, but in those 2010s when purpose was the buzzword, these little MBAs were just like panicking. So I really like to relieve purpose pressure. A lot of this comes out of that. And I really think of it as, I like to parallel it to like emergent strategy, right?
Ooh.
Where it's very difficult. I mean, my God, in these days, but even just in this decade, to try to project a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year, like how on earth, right? We won't talk about all the reasons why that's so impossible right now. But, it's hard. It's been hard for a while just because of technology and the pace of change and the interconnectivity. And so similarly, think about emergent purpose,
Mhm.
right? That it's not about, okay, I'm 22 and that's what I'm going to spend my life doing because of this one moment. It might not be so. It might be, right? As you
Yeah.
know, my keynote starts with the fact that when I was 12, I had an experience and that has really shaped my purpose. It's very high level as purposes are. And so it has looked a lot of different
Mm.
ways, from frontline service work in refugee camp communities to corporate board keynotes, right? Those look very different to an outsider maybe, but to me, they really clearly ladder to that red thread, right? And so for me, there was something that happened early and became clear, of course, in retrospect, right? At 12, I
Mm.
didn't quite have language to say, like, this is my purpose and this is the path by which I'm going to pursue it. But it really was that moment. But a lot of people don't necessarily have that, and
Mm.
people will say, I've grown up really privileged. I didn't have a hard time, or my cousin doesn't have a rare form of cancer that I want to help to cure, or, I, I don't, and goodness knows there's a bajillion problems that are
Yeah.
worth solving. So how do I pick? And so this notion of emergent purpose is to just start noticing,
Mm.
right? That's why my framework, the Lead in 3D framework, is an equation fundamentally. And so I have a spreadsheet, really nerdy spreadsheet that weekly and quarterly I track how things are going in me world and how I'm investing my energy and time and attention and money in my spheres of impact to notice and be
Mm.
able to say, you know what, I'm doing this volunteering that I thought I should do or that lined up to my background and my past. And so that made sense as purpose. But I kind of like dread going every week. Or cosmically, there's something. I always get a meeting or a deadline and I can't go. And then I feel guilty, or I'm late, or I go, but I'm not present. Well, what is that about, right? What can we notice there about that volunteering that maybe isn't aligned to your purpose? And so both the like really truly day to day, like what are the headlines that catch your eye? What emails do you answer first? Which emails sit in your inbox like for weeks because you're like, I don't really want to do that ever, And this can start to inform what we love to do, how we love to contribute, and toward what issues or causes or communities. So I like it. Just decrease the pressure, but not don't do anything about it. I'm not saying to just sit around and wait for it to hit you in the head, because it might, but it probably won't. And so, what do you see yourself coming alive to? I think that's the
Mm.
best data
Yeah.
source.
Yeah, yeah, and you said several things there, like, to coming alive is, like, noticing how you're feeling in your body. Like, you mentioned, Are you feeling guilty? Do you feel dread? Are you not present when you're in this, in this meeting or this situation? What are you gravitating to doing first? What are you acting on first? Like those are all signals that your body is telling you, or that your heart is telling you that you want to do or align with. So,
Totally. And
yeah.
look, I have had to pay rent and student loans over my life as well. So I
Yeah.
also understand that like revenue and income are very
Mhm.
real, important survival factors that are not at all
Yeah.
trivial. And so I'm not just saying like, wow, I love baking cakes. Like maybe I should be a baker, maybe. And that might be a difficult path for one reason or another. And don't just silence that, right? I think we have such a reflex toward like, that's not practical. I can't do that, right? And it's like, just listen. And maybe what you love about baking is creating something from nothing, in which case maybe you're a better strategist than project manager, for example. Maybe it's chemistry that you
Mm.
love, and actually you should get out of marketing and go play with chemicals in a lab. I don't know, but I just encourage people like, don't poo poo, watch everything. Everything is good data, and then kind of dig deeper, right? If you love baking and going to dinner and grocery shopping, okay, we're starting to see like a pretty clear food thing here. But if you love
Mm.
going out to dinner and watching panels at conferences and networking events, okay, there's like a person thing here. So just notice. I invite people to give themselves like 6 months, ideally, at least, maybe a year. And
Mhm.
there's a bunch of different ways to do it. Some are in my book and I'm happy to share, and others are free form or people have their own ways. But just simply capturing those moments of aliveness and the moments of dread and avoidance
Yeah.
and non-presence, right? Good and bad are both important to
Oh, such wise wisdom. We'll definitely share the book in the show notes for anyone
notice.
listening so that you can
Yeah.
learn more about how you can get better at noticing those things so you can get alignment. Just the other day, I was talking with someone about saying no and saying yes. And it was so
Mm.
interesting because, traditionally I've been a yes person. I say yes to everything, sometimes without thinking about it. And it was so fascinating. I remember I was having this conversation and I remember saying, well, I don't know what I want to say yes to. And they said,
Mm.
well, you just told me that you wanted to say no to something. And I was like,
Uh,
yeah. And he's like, well, that is you telling, like, you saying no is the first step to figuring out what you want to say yes to. And
yeah.
I was like, that was so wise to me. I was like, sometimes that's the first thing we have to do is like look at what's on our plate and realize, okay, what are the clear no's so we can open up space for what are the right yeses that we want to step into a little bit. And I love your invitation to lead with curiosity too. I think
Mm.
that's so important. Sometimes we
Yeah.
lose that as we get to be older. So amazing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well,
And
thank
even actually, that's something I think that's changed. I worry about kids today and their
Mm,
curiosity because I just think they are little worry muffins. And rightly, they see a really intense political, economical,
mm,
context into which they are growing up. And it is scary. And I think the reaction of like, it should all be perfect, it should all be linear, I should follow these certain prescribed paths is actually really counterproductive because things are changing so quickly. Their parents or their media or their whatever don't know either. And so I really worry about I see that narrowness coming young,
mm. Yeah.
which breaks my heart, first of all, because I had these 20s that were international and traveling and living and a bit hand to mouth, frankly, but thank goodness, I'm so grateful for it. Of course, it's not the only way to do your 20s, but it's one way and it's really juicy and rich. So I worry about that
Mm.
lack of curiosity in younger folks earlier and earlier.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I think there's a lot of because kids know so much now and have access to so much at such a younger age. And unfortunately, the pressures of being so exposed on social media where your world used to be so small, you'd have this little network. Now you're so exposed and you see everyone else, the threats of the comparison comes in and you feel that pressure creeping in of like, I got to figure this out right now is scary, something we have to kind of watch for and arm ourselves against
Yeah.
as children.
and they have, not to get down this rabbit hole too far, but they have all this information and maybe
Mm,
knowledge in some ways, but none of us know what we don't know. And what they don't have is wisdom or
mm,
experience. And so I think there's this false sense of knowing and
mm,
certainty, or but also a back of the mind, like, I don't know. I'm 19, I'm 27, I'm 33. Like, I don't know yet, but I can find anything out. I can ask ChatGPT or Google it or whatever, and it's right there. But there's this whole other dimension of
mm.
wisdom and experience that they can't have had. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you can get by fine without it. We all did too. But not knowing that you don't know that is dangerous.
I love that invitation to like leading with curiosity in those moments, right? When you don't know, be curious, be flexible, explore, open your mind up. That's a great
Yeah.
challenge,
Yeah.
I think for younger generations specifically.
Mm,
Yeah. Oh man, I had a follow-up question and I completely lost it and I didn't write it down. That is the worst ever. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh, what was I gonna ask? It was
it'll
about
come
oh,
back.
I
It's
remember, it
fine.
was a comment.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the things that's so beautiful about, like, the creative process, like, my daughter's 10 and she loves to
Mm,
paint,
mm,
and my favorite piece of art that she has is there's she's not following any sort of she didn't copy a drawing.
yeah.
She literally just, like, painted something from her imagination, and watching the process of her paint is a lot like I think what you're inviting people to do, is it's messy.
Mm,
There's not
mm,
like a prescriptive, let's paint. I mean, you can paint by number, but let's paint by number. We're going to just follow this pathway to get to this end beautiful masterpiece. But the process of painting is
mm,
challenging. You doubt yourself through that process. Like she'll paint something like, I don't like the way that I did this. And then she'll have to paint it a different way or she'll paint over it or whatever. And I think that's just like such a microcosm for like what is a
mm,
beautiful masterpiece like, led life is you're willing to just, like you said, start noticing emergent, like what is emerging for you? What's this next
mm,
stroke you want to paint with your brush? Take that
mhm.
next stroke and then kind of go from there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Man.
And as a relatively type A human who has
Mm.
been rewarded and trained to fit in a box and do processes and achieve,
Mm.
I have created this scaffolding of this framework to hold all of that,
Mm.
because bless your daughter's heart, and I aspire to get back there, maybe in my 60s or 70s or something, to that beautiful childlike place where you're
Yeah.
actually okay with it. But for me, in mapping a life and a career and thinking and guidance, this very linear kind of bucketing is essential for me. Like, it's how I
Mm.
see the world. And so to have these 6 spheres of impact, which don't influence what I do, they just describe, okay, there are these 6 ways in which I can spend my time, attention, energy in my work and life. And anything I do can fit into either self or family and friends or my job or my workplace, a little more broadly professional, but not quite my job of what I'm paid to do, my community, of course, beyond that, and then my money, how I spend and buy and invest and donate. And those inputs lead to the 3D outputs of me, we, and world. Right. And so I don't want to
Mm.
sound like a maniac, right? But it's not that every day I'm like calendaring this to that and this to that, and it be free form and emergent and observing, but with somewhere to kind of plot it and make sense of it, is the magic to me. And that's what has been so resonant for the leaders that I've worked with over this time,
Mhm.
who come from a corporate reality or an Ivy League
Yeah.
reality, or, and we have metrics and there are KPIs and we're tracking certain things. And there's nothing
Mm.
wrong with that at all. And for real creativity, or certainly in my work for real impact and progress on social and environmental goals, there has to be creativity and change. And so we need
Mm.
both. But that's the magic that I've found of this lead in 3D approach, is that it takes purpose, which could be seen as terrifyingly freeform and not financially, viable and all of those things, to actually being something that we can track and shape.
I love that. It's like this beautiful bridge to like creativity and structure and creating a way to be able to bring both of those together that brings a
Yeah.
lot of grace to people. So that those many
Yeah.
type A's in this world who
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
let's be honest, the people, it's very common to be type A and want to make a difference in the world. And how can you bridge both, which is so beautiful.
A
Oh,
1000%. And
love it.
constraint is actually a driver, right? When you do innovation thinking or design thinking, you add constraints, because if you just say, make me something,
Yeah.
it, it's like, what's your purpose? It's very paralyzing, right? Because there's
Yeah.
so much.
So many
Whereas if you
options.
say, make me something that, adds light, or make me something that carries water, who knows
Mm.
what people might come up with, right? It might be like just another glass, or it might be a bird that carries water, or, I don't know what, a cell. So, but I think adding the structure actually can really enhance creativity.
Very cool. And what have you found with, I know you do bring in equine coaching into your
Mm,
practice. Tell me about what you found. What kind of does that add to the whole experience for the people that you're coaching? How does that
yeah.
help them support this lead in 3D framework?
So, so a teeny bit of background just for context. I trained with a phenomenal woman named Kelly Wendorf, who's the founder of Equus Inspired in Santa
Mm,
Fe. She grew up in indigenous communities because her father was an archaeologist. And so she grew up with
mm,
Maasai tribes and warriors in Kenya, and then in Australia with
wow.
Aboriginal communities there. And so she has this very deeply rooted, she is a white woman and grew up in those communities and cultures of practice and spirituality connected to nature and the land and history and horses. And then she has studied all kinds of versions on top of that and has this beautiful understanding of horse culture. A lot of times when we
Mm,
interact with horses, it's very singularly, right? As a trainer, as a rider, as a horse whisperer, or, that might be called. And she has really zoomed out to look at the whole herd, which indeed is the magic, and how horses are one of the most successful mammals in 3.8 billion years of evolution. They have survived climate shocks, little tectonic plate shifts of like the earth
mm,
moving under their feet. They are still around. And so a lot to learn from them as a herd, because they're prey animals, right? They're not predators. It's not that they've gone around kind of hunting and killing to survive. They've had to live together. So that's where my training and background in this work is. And indeed, we take leaders, groups, or individuals into the arena and hang out with the horses. Nobody's riding. We're
mm.
just being present with them. And there's a lot to it. So I won't get it all in here. But the number one thing is maybe a huge reveal to your listeners: horses don't talk. I know some of us grew up with Mr. Ed, if we're 80s babies. They
A horse is
can't
a horse, of course,
speak.
of course.
How good? I mean, how good was that? So ridiculous. I can like picture the animatronics. Um, and so the work is nonverbal.
Mm,
And it tracks very nicely. It's such a smart follow up to the conversation about structure and creativity, because every people you work with, people I work with, people are very smart. We're very intellectual, high
mhm,
performing beings. Again, in a pretty, whether we're type A or not, in a pretty type A white male patriarchal capitalist
mm,
system, which is linear and intellectual and up here. And so, as I said, COVID kind of finally like helped us remember that we have lungs and a heart and mouths that sneeze. We've been so cut off from body.
mm,
And as we know, scientifically, neurologically, problems don't get fully resolved only from here up. There are heart pieces and there are gut
mm.
pieces. There are literally neurons and nerves all through our bodies that influence our decisions and our learning and our reactions and our memories. And so to have this experience of a few hours or a few days of back and forth with the horses, with nature, with ourselves, with each other in the Equus retreats that I do, forces that nonverbal to come. Because what horses can do and do very well is sense. They have hearts. They're large. If you've ever seen a horse, I also work with some mini horses, which are less large, but the horses we work with are huge. And so they have these massive hearts that, like our hearts, radiate electromagnetic waves because they are beating and sending pulses. And that has literal physical ripples. Only theirs go about half a mile out.
Wow.
Just because of physics, they're so large that
Mhm.
the waves carry further. And they've had to survive as prey animals amid climate shocks, amid, territory that they share with predators and so forth. And so they have to be really tuned in and sensitive. And
Mm.
so when we enter their herd in the arena, they are connected to us, not because I've trained them to do that or give them carrots after, but because that's their evolutionary drive to survive.
Mm.
And so the awakenings that are provoked in that nonverbal but deeply connected and perceptive encounter are transformational
Mm.
because they tap into that deeper level, number one. Number two, they have all of this horse wisdom to influence, which is a very feminine style of leadership, right? They do as little as possible. They lead from the back by observation. It's all about conservation of energy. And then number three, the follow up is so visceral. I can share a story in a minute if that's helpful. But
Mhm.
it's not just like, oh, I was sitting with my coach on Zoom and she said this thing that made me realize. It's like he kicked up dust and it entered my nostrils, and I will always remember that that was annoying and uncomfortable. Or she stayed with me even when I tried to walk away, and I will never forget that feeling of support and togetherness. Right. So you have this before of the nonverbal, this during of the actual wisdom, and then this after that you're left with that's so visceral that it's just a different level of insight and growth.
So fascinating. Very visceral. I love that there's definitely this self-reflection component. So it sounds like the horses, because they're just so empathic, it's almost like they're mirroring the person, whatever that person may be internally feeling or sensing, that might not be that be maybe so subconscious they might not even be aware that it's happening. And then the horse is able to mirror that to them in a way that it brings it to their awareness. And they can reflect on it and be like, oh, I didn't realize I was showing up that way, in a way that they can then, is that kind of the experience?
Exactly. Mirroring is the
Mhm.
exact verb that I use for one of three ways that they
Mm.
teach. Mirroring is one, and it's very powerful. So I worked with a guy who came, again, he was kind of an encore career, like retirement bubble starting to be a consideration.
Mm.
And he was in the arena with a few other clients and three horses. And one of the horses, who does this work a lot and really enjoys it, I mean, you can actually see the horses are quite engaged and happy doing the work, which is fun. So he was kind of locked in and engaging with her. And she went to the gate where we come in and started kicking the gate, which I'd never seen her do before, right? Again, she's very happy in the work. She lives on this farm, a great life. And I was like, wow. And so again, a lot of this, to your point, is just self-reflection, right? Like I have a whole bunch of knowledge and training on horse language and all of that, but a lot of it is just very direct. Like you
Mm.
can't make this up. And so people get it. Like they are communicating directly with the horses. And so the mirroring was him kicking his way out of his career. He was like, "Ooh,
Interesting.
I am kicking the doors down right now."
Wow.
And I don't know. I didn't know what that was. I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe she's feeling sick. Maybe the hay was off this morning and she wants to get back to her paddock. No, no, no. He's like 1,000%. That was me. She was showing me bursting at the seams to leave this constraint.
Wow.
So yes, mirroring is a thing and it is potent and people do not mistake it. I think it's
Yeah.
the most dramatic version of teaching. The other two are modeling, right? Horses will do something to show you what you might do. And that is also very powerful. And sometimes people see that really clearly. I think it's a little more subtle sometimes. People don't quite get it. And the third is kind of guiding. They'll like lead you to something, either physically or visually. And that can be the most subtle. Interestingly, people often think the horse is trying to get away from them. And so they're like, oh, then he left or she left, and then I'm like, oh, I don't think so. I think that was a leading towards something. And that might be, we use the cardinal directions to some extent, right? That might be
Interesting.
leading toward east, a new beginning, might be leading towards south, the kind of younger adolescent vibes. So anyway, it can be different things, but I would say they're subtle in that order, but mirroring tends to kind of catch people on the nose.
Wow. I could see how this would be, well, incredibly impactful for wherever you're at in your career, but especially if you're in the middle of a transition
Oh
or
yeah.
a change. That's
Oh yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna have to come to one of your retreats. I'm like
Santa
so
Fe,
in
October, going live next week.
Really? All right. I'm gonna have to look into this. I'm super
Hmm.
intrigued. Oh man. Well, I would love to hear. Well, I feel like we have just been going on and on. And I'm like, we need to talk about the woman in history that inspires
Yes,
you.
I can't wait to talk about her.
So, okay, so on the show, everyone shares a guest. Everyone shares a guest. Every guest shares a woman in history who inspires them. So I've been dying to know who it is, who is your women that inspire
Yeah,
you now, and tell us a little bit about her.
lots of them for sure. But when you asked this, it was really obvious to me. So
Uh-huh.
Hilma af Klint is a
Hmm.
Swedish artist. Have you heard of her?
I have never heard of her.
I should, I have to set up my studio so that she's showcased because she's in my office very prominently.
Uh huh.
Um, so she lived from the late 1860 or the 1860s through 1944.
Okay.
And she was trained, she was kind of a aristocratic. I think her family was kind of like military kind of royalty, like of officers and stuff in the Swedish Navy, maybe military.
Okay.
And so she was trained like a good girl in the kind of academia of painting and was a very talented technical painter. And then she had a group of women, kind of a spiritual mind trust that got together and prayed in not a Christian way, but a spiritual way. And at some point, one of the spirit guides or messengers that they communicated with said, we have a commission, we have art that we would like to communicate through you. And the
Mm.
rest of the group, I think there were 5 or 6 women, most of the group was like, that's, I'm not comfortable with that. Like that feels too through the fold or just too over the top. And Hilma said, I got you, I'm up for it. And so she like downloaded a lot of art and work, including this series of 10 of the sequence of life. I can find a link to it and send it for show notes.
Yeah.
It was displayed at the Guggenheim maybe 7 years ago now, was where I first discovered it. And they are these 10-foot tall by more than that, 20 feet tall by 10 feet wide. I mean, these massive panels of these vibrant primary spring colors and these beautiful shapes and forms, including the DNA helix, which she painted about 10 years before
Wow.
Watson and Crick said a peep.
Are you
Um,
serious? Wow.
so 2000 paintings or something, which she put in her will with her nephew to be locked away for about 20 years after her death, knowing that the world was not ready,
Wow.
and then released. And indeed, now as we look back, it's like, okay, she was actually the first among the first before Kandinsky, before Mondrian, when we think about that more kind of abstract form of art.
Wow, that's incredible. What a visionary.
Amazing.
Yeah, and to have the foresight, like, specifically to know that when this needed to be released into the world is very powerful.
Very
So
powerful.
was she a scientist and an artist?
She was not a scientist, as far as I know.
But she knew the DNA, like, she was able to I mean, that's interesting to me. Do you think she knew that it was the DNA helix, or do you think
Not
she just had
necessarily. I
this.
think she was tapped into the universe,
Yeah.
and so she saw that because that's the building block of the universe, right? I don't know.
So cool. I don't think I've ever seen a piece of art by her. Now I'm so intrigued.
Oh,
We're gonna have to let me see if I can find one really quick on ChatGPT. So what is it that you admire most about her? And that what is it that connected to you to her? Was it just seeing her art for the first time?
That was loud, right? I
Mm,
didn't know the whole story. A friend brought me to the exhibit and it was like, whoa, it's just, it drew me in. It spoke to me in a way. Again, I find it really beautiful. And partially it's these kind of candy colors, and these very organic, soft shapes. So I think just absolutely stunning, but not in
mhm.
like a pretty princess kind of way, in a very rich, layered way. So that was my hook. And then the story, there's a few parts, right? There's this courage to accept
Yeah.
an invitation from spirit to like paint things, which is
Mhm.
pretty trippy, especially in the 1890s as like the good daughter of military officers in Sweden. I don't know what that must have felt like, but five of her friends weren't up for it, right? So already she separated herself as courageous.
Yeah.
Um,
Not afraid to
and
stand
then,
alone.
yeah,
Mhm.
and then to be capable of doing that, of transforming universe message into physical form, I think is an amazing thing, right? I don't know. We all, even just as like a writer, I feel like, or even as a speaker, having a figment of an idea that comes from us or from higher source to put that out in the world in a way that you feel like honors that is hard in my experience, like
So true.
I'll read my thing or see myself on stage. I'm like, oh, that's not like the nugget is so much. Can you just get in my brain and hear it? Because it's better. And
The
then
artist's
as,
curse, right? I swear.
mm,
Yeah.
and your point, what you caught onto of like knowing to not just spray it out there
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
protect it, even though that meant that Kandinsky and Mondrian took off with whatever. I mean, they probably would have anyway, being men in the art world in the early 20th century, but she didn't even, put herself up for that. She took the risk that her nephew, that the art world, that the universe would bring her stuff to prominence when it was time.
What a legacy.
What a legacy.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So I'm just reading about how I'm seeing her work now. I've never seen it before. It's so intriguing. It's so
Right?
unique. Yeah, we'll share some in the show notes for the listeners to be able to see. But so it looks like she co-founded this group of women who
That's
conducted
the, yes.
seances and explored spiritual themes. I've actually never been to a seance or done
Me
that before.
neither.
Have
That's why I
you?
call it kind of like a spiritual group.
Yeah,
No.
I'd be
I was
so
like, I don't know.
interested in doing something like that, which would be so fascinating. But oh, very cool. Thank you for sharing about her.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think of the word moxie, what comes to mind to you?
Mm.
What
It's
do you
such
think?
a great word. I had to, of course, like look up a definition and like ask ChatGPT because it's such an evocative word. But
Yeah.
um, I think, I mean, it was funny hearing you talk about saying no, because one of the
Mhm.
first kind of illustrations that came to me was it's saying no, it's enlightened no's and really whole embodied yeses. Like, but so I think
Mm.
there's a lot around contrast for it to me of like being really comfortable in contrast, right? Of being soft and loving and gentle and strong and vicious as needed and saying no and meaning it and having no be a full sentence and taking a risk to say yes to an invitation or whatever that might be. Yeah, but that's how I think that yes and is a lot of it to me.
You just gave me the goosebumps. That was so beautifully stated. Like so cool. Like I just that like my body is screaming at me. Yes, that's what moxie is.
That.
That's amazing. I love that definition. I love the
Mm.
idea of the contrast because I think that's
Hmm.
so true. In so many aspects of our lives, there's always that tension between two things. You know, you can feel deep grief for something at the same time you can be deeply excited for something and you can hold space for both those things at the same time.
Totally.
And I think that's so beautiful about this idea of moxie too. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's another false Einsteinian quote that isn't actually him, but I love, this idea that genius is holding two contrasting ideas in mind at the same time. I think that's
yeah.
so real. And that's
It
kind of what
is.
I kept coming to. And it's interesting, it comes from him or doesn't, who knows? Because I think it's also very the gray, in that spectrum of things, or the two opposites and the in between, is so feminine, right? Not a woman
Mm-hmm.
thing, but a feminine version of leadership, and it's not better or worse than the kind of masculine, black, white, either or choice. I think the feminine is like, yeah, it's tough and it's teary, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that is true and not in opposition, which I think these days is so important, to
Yeah.
survive, frankly.
Yeah, there's a lot going on these days.
Yeah,
So I would love to
yeah.
hear from you as, you're coaching leaders and, I don't want to get too political here, but like embracing the reality of the world that we're living in now.
Mm,
There's a lot of change happening. There's a lot of uncertainty that's impacted a
mhm,
lot of so many people in our country and across
mhm.
the world. What are you finding to be most helpful helping leaders navigate through a lot of this uncertainty? What is really on your mind, on your heart, on the hearts of the people that you're serving right now?
Really, the headline, biggest, first, most, is to zoom out and keep a longer
Mm,
perspective and resist the chaos.
yeah.
Because first of all, and this is the more political side of things, I think that's the game plan, is to suck
Mm,
smart people and institutions into chaos. And so resist that first and
yeah.
foremost. But also because it's just real. Things don't happen in 10 seconds, right? As much as something might be signed, as we've seen, it then falls apart. Like execution takes time and votes have to move and, things aren't
Yeah.
actually instantaneous. And so I recognize, some of the leaders that I work with who are dealing with, she's not anymore, but Christy Smith, who I'm interviewing Monday, had 750,000 employees as the CHRO of Accenture. Like, I understand that there are some urgencies in that, or supply chain, like, whoa, where is this
Mhm.
stuff coming? So I'm not belittling
Yeah.
that. And that's not my expertise. So I get to just be like, good luck. I don't know. There's other consultants for that. I'm not sure how to help. But
Yeah.
what I do know and where I can help and where I can guide is on that leadership front, and really to look further back in history also,
Mm.
right? At precedent or other things of, is this that unprecedented? I think in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. And to really look further forward, and deeper, right? To really hold the deep
Mm.
depth of how we want to show up, who we want to be, what legacy we want to leave behind. And to the most dramatic point, what does that mean then? And are there scary or risky choices that we want to and are willing to make because of that? And just briefly, the quote from Jane Fonda in one of, I guess it was the SAG gala that she accepted the speech. And so she said, if if the manifestation today were over the bridge to Selma, would you walk? And she had a few other examples of these kind of moments in history.
Mm.
And she said, this is our documentary moment.
Yeah.
And so I like to think of myself as someone who would cross the bridge. And yet I don't know what the bridge is right now. I didn't participate last Saturday in any of the events, which I thought were amazing. We
Mm.
were traveling. It didn't really occur to me. I haven't been to marches in these last years. I sort of doubt myself for it, but it's not a hell yes to me. And so I don't. And I am curious, but relatively confident that my ways of contributing just look different and they're real and I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
And that's just not one of them. And I think it's really important that we all keep an eye on, like, that is going to come up, and it probably won't look like a Facebook post about a protest, I don't think. And so what will it look like, and will you notice, and will you be willing to do something that might feel scary?
That is so on the nose and so important. I love
Mm,
the invitation to look bigger and
mm,
broader
mm.
and deeper at the same time, thinking about,
Yeah.
like, contrasts.
Yeah.
Such a
Right.
beautiful, like, contrast, but so important for right now to look out and step out and say, "Okay, what's in my control? Let's not freak out here." And then look in and say, "What is in my control?
Yeah.
What are my values telling me, and how am I going to step up and align my values in a
Yeah.
way that's bold?" And the time calls for boldness, you know?
Yeah.
if you think back, like there's a beautiful book by Eric Larson that I love, In the Garden of Beasts.
Mm,
And it's about the run up to World War II. And it's the
mm,
story of the US ambassador to Germany at the time. And
mm,
it's fascinating I want to reread it because it's fascinating to think it's kind of like a frog in boiling water,
mhm.
and I find that there's a lot of similarities, unfortunately, that
Yeah.
seem to be striking at this time, that people haven't reached that point where they're willing to really just step up and do something. We're starting to see some of that.
Yep.
But yeah, so I love that call to action. That's
Mm,
very good.
mm,
Thank you.
mhm.
Okay, well, this has been such a great show, and we didn't get a chance for you to share your Moxie moment. So I have to hear it. We have to close out our show, and I want you to
Okay.
share what is your Moxie moment, Nell? And I know you've had a billion of them, but if you could share one of them for our listeners, tell us a story. What was a time when you really just like exhibited that beautiful definition that you just described of, you know, leading with softness, but also
Yeah.
strength?
Can I give a few? Because I
Yeah,
feel like it's important.
totally.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll make them each little tidbits.
You bet.
Um, so one is I moved to Tokyo after college.
Mm.
I was graduating from Harvard and everybody was kind of on to their professional tracks. And I was like, I'm going to go teach English. I don't know. And so I drove across country with my mom, flew to San Francisco to Tokyo and got there and was like, it's so easy. It's westernized. It's Tokyo. It'll be great. Was jet lagged because I couldn't read when I landed, got lost on my way to the grocery store the first day. Like it was Moxie. It was wild and it was amazing. So that was one. Another really fun one that because I know you and love you, I want to share was in between my marriages, I was divorced and kind of trying to figure life out in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, including dating. And so I was dating and I was dating this guy. It was a little sensitive because of some like common relationships. It was a little touchy. We were in London and going to dinner and meeting on the street in London and our community was around. And so we met up and I just kissed him on the street. And he was like,
That's amazing.
it's London. Like the chances that there was going to be one of the 10 people, but whatever. But he was just really blown away. And I was like,
Look at you,
what?
girl.
It was hysterical. So that was a really
How
fun
did
one
he
that I had to
receive
get
that
in there.
kiss?
Like shocked positively, I would say.
That's amazing. So here you are. You just like walk up to him on the streets of London and just make out with him. I love
It
that.
was
That's
gentle. It was
beautiful.
like not a full bake out, but I planted a wet one. It was good. Another real contrast was coming home with my interns into the city that we lived in Palestine a few minutes after curfew. We lived in a city that was shut off by military checkpoints.
Mm.
And we had gone to Ramallah, the Christian city, to have drinks and have a little, letting off steam with the interns. We were a few minutes after the midnight curfew. And so we're met with locked gates and Uzis held by the
Mm.
18-year-old armed guards from the IDF that controlled our city and our bed is in there and so we won't do the play by play, but basically my feisty intern who was very upset about this whole situation and an 18-year-old armed soldier, that was a very Moxie interaction of like firmness. Like we live there and we have American passports and we were getting into our beds and intern, I need you to like pipe down and not make this an armed conflict. So that was intense.
Wow.
Um, and the final one that just resonated for me with you today that is trivial, but I think holds a lot. And I know you just went through kind of new headshots and all of that
Mhm.
was choosing to put this fabulous headshot that I love from a shoot that I did a year ago of me in a sequin dress, very thin strapped party dress to be sure. And putting that on my professional speaker site, along with the
Woohoo.
turtleneck and the blue blazer and all of that. But that felt like a really important honest embrace of sequins and substance.
And who you are as a
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so
Yeah.
important. I think personal branding these days and just leaning into authentically showing up as yourself is what's going to separate us from the AI bots. So kudos to you for
A
embracing
thousand
the
percent.
sequence.
Yeah.
Love it.
Totally.
Man, you're so full of moxie. I just adore you. Such a generous heart. So, if you haven't had a chance to connect with Nell and
Mm,
you get to meet her, you've gotten to see her in this amazing episode. You've gotten a taste for just what a beautiful, generous, warm, and giving and brilliant heart that she has. And
mm,
I'm just so honored you'd come on the show and share
mm.
a little piece of you, which just a small little smidgen of the amazingness that you are. So thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom and your experience. And it's been such a joy, as I knew it would.
Total
And
pleasure, Nicole.
yeah.
Same. And thank you for zeroing in on, I haven't heard your Moxie origin story, which will have to be for another time, but I love it. Thank you for doing this and your own book publishing. And it's just such a brilliant way to do what you do.
Thank
So a
you.
total delight.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's a wrap for another episode. And until next time, say hello, Moxie. That's a wrap for today's episode of Hello Moxie. I hope you felt that unbreakable thread connecting you to the women of the past, to the trailblazing pioneers of today. Their stories of audacity, resilience, and courage are a powerful reminder of what's possible for you when you choose to live with Moxie.